Hello, everybody. I'm Cameron Bowden, and this is my topic discussion post for History 3300, Tudor England. And the topic I will be talking about today is the Battle of Marston Moor, which was a battle that took place on July 2nd, 1644, during the First English Civil War. And now we'll be discussing what led to the events that caused Battle of Marston Moor to happen, and what happened after the Battle of Marston Moor happened. Now, a bit of a prelude to the Battle of Marston Moor and the English Civil War, the First English Civil War in itself, was that the England had a string of kings and queens that had various results. One such queen would be Mary the First, who was known as Bloody Mary, who was a Catholic queen and wasn't really well liked by the Protestants of England because she changed a lot, reformed a lot of things to help out Catholics, and then people okay, what the hell are you doing? And then after her, we also had the likes of Elizabeth the First, who is considered by many to be one of the greatest queens slash kings in English history, and by some, a large population, to be the best king or queen England to ever have. We also would have James the First, who wasn't really well liked by people, but more now current day at the time of this, we would have King Charles the First, who was the current ruler, and he wasn't really liked by the people of England or Parliament at the time. And what led to the dislike of him was that he was married to Henrietta Maria, who was Catholic, and Charles I was seen as a Protestant, but many people speculate that behind the scenes, Maria would actually convert him to Catholicism in secret. So to help out his image and his likeness from the people, Charles I would fund Catholic expedition where a English fleet would go down to Spain and bring back the times of Sir Francis Drake as piracy, pillage the land, get all the loot. But this expedition was poorly planned out, wasn't properly supplied. By the time they were getting near the area of Spain, they were drinking rum, so they were kind of drunk, sluggish when the battle happened, and they got slaughtered. And this expedition would cost £250,000 at the time, which is now roughly equals 65 million US dollars, showcasing its how much of a disaster it was. And this would also piss off Parliament because now they're Charles I wanted to support the French Huguenots in France against the Catholics, and Parliament's we don't want to fund you, and if we were to fund you, we want to get concessions related to religious issues. So this would lead to the creation of the Petition of Rights in 1628. Now, around this time, Charles I would also start his own taxes, such as the distraint of knighthood, where if a man was worth more than £40, he would have to pay you do that, or if he didn't want to become a knight, he would have to pay a fine. This kind of pissed people off. And then you had the force law, where he would reclaim a bunch of royal force that would become more public and would charge people fines or fees to pass through them, pissing even more people off. And then the ship money, in which coastal towns in England would have to supply ships in defense for England for future defenses of the land or future expeditions, fleets to attack other lands. And this just pissed people off. But what this also would do would lead to Charles the First have come up with an idea do I really need Parliament to lead England? I can do all this myself. To me, I'm doing a good job. So he would learn for this period of personal rule, and this angered people. This angered Parliament, who would create demands such as they would have to meet at least. He would have to call Parliament at least every 3 years, and they would target people that were close to the king and queen, and he would eventually cave in and sign this and make sure that it happened. But around this time, he would also bring his royal guard to meet these people and hey, I want to know who wrote this. I didn't like this, but they weren't there. So then he left England. His wife would leave 2 years after that, would go to France, sell jewels, and would fund his military. And why would he need a military? Well, now England would be into their first civil war. And the two sides of the Civil War were the Royalists, otherwise known as the Cavaliers, or the Parliamentarians, otherwise known as the Roundheads. Roundheads got the name by their haircut, such as seen in the picture to the left, and the Cavaliers would get the name because of the clothing, such as the pictures on the right, as they would embrace modern clothing trends in England, while as the Roundheads would not. Now, the Roundheads were also not unified at the beginning of the Civil War, as you had the Peace Party and the War Party. The peace party, they wanted to meet with the king to come to an agreement of demands and avoid bloodshed of English people and on English land. Whereas the war party, they wanted to fight. They wanted to like enforce like what they wanted, and they were all for like fighting the people and fighting battles on the land. Now, during the early stages of the English Civil War, neither side could gain a real advantage. It was more of a slog where one side would win, but it wouldn't amount to much, and then the other side would win the next battle, and it wouldn't amount to much either. Now, a prominent role player or player in the parliamentarians would be Oliver Cromwell. He was born April 25th, 1599, in eastern England. He would become the general of cavalry for the Roundheads due to his leadership, because he insisted that soldiers be properly trained and loyal and be specifically picked so that like to not have anyone that would slug behind and cause a problem. And he was so like into like be properly trained and loyal troops that he would call out his other generals, officers, lieutenants, all that for being incompetent. Like, hey, you are not really into it. You are being sluggish. You're being slow. This is like not really helpful for us. And he would fight alongside prominent products such as Sir Thomas Fairfax, Edward Montague. Where he would also serve under Edward Montague, who was the second Earl of Manchester, and these guys would serve together and during the Battle of Marston Moor. And we'll talk more about the Earl of Montague later on, and Earl of Manchester, because Cromwell also would call him on his bullshit. Cromwell would also later become the Lord Protector of the realm of London of England after the first English Civil War. Now, a prominent player on the Royalist Cavalier side would be Prince Rupert of the Rhine, who was born December 17th, 1619, in Prague, Bohemia, or modern-day Czech Republic. He was the son of Frederick V, who was a elector of Palatine, and would actually, for a brief period, be Frederick I, King of Bohemia. And he was actually the nephew of Charles I, because his mother was the sister of Charles. And when he got to England right before the Civil War started, and when he became a general, he was securing wins after wins because he was actually a soldier during the 30-Year Wars and was actually fighting against Imperial Spain forces. And since he had military experience, this proved useful in the early stages as he was securing win after win after win after win early on. But he was also, due to his young age and lack of maturity, wasn't also well received by his peers, which would eventually lead to him losing his position during the Civil War. And now the gathering the forces at the Marston Moor, these forces would meet due to King Charles I asking Prince Rupert of the Rhine, hey, I need you to go uphold the siege in York because they are currently under siege. I need you to go relieve them, like all that stuff. He would get there, successfully do that, but they would also catch wind that a large Roundhead parliamentarian force was on the way, made up of soldiers of Roundheads and actually troops from Scotland. But the leader at York would ask Rupert, like, hey, wait, we can wait until we get reinforcements, so we're not outmanned. Like, this is a big force, we don't want to be outnumbered. To which Prince Rupert replied, I was asked to do two things: to uphold the siege in York and to fight a battle. And he goes, I've only done one of those things. So he met out to go to Marston Moor, as seen in the top left, the flatlands. Like, wasn't exactly like that as it was back then, but you can see, like, take a grasp like what the conditions might have been like to meet this large Roundhead force. Both sides would line up in similar formations with cavalry on the side and infantry middle. This was a common tactic that was used by the Swedes and mostly Europe, where you would have cavalry on the outside, dragoons nearby, dragoons which were hybrid soldiers that could fight on both horseback and on foot as infantry, but they spent more time as infantry, but they were also like versatile. And then you would have infantrymen of like musketmen in the middle, because they would be able to disrupt horses, because warfare is ever changing, and musketmen was so powerful because they could attack from range that horsemen, they're still dominant, but not as dominant as they had been. They also had field cannons set up to shoot at the forces before advancing, because they would do this to like lower the numbers while also lowering the morale. And July 2nd would become the day of the battle in 1644. And as you see on the bottom left, the plan of royalist dispositions at Marston Moor, which were drawn up by Sir Bernard de Gaume, showcases how the musketeermen were in front of the cavalry as like a way to like advance, and like then cavalry could go out and pincer maneuver. Now the forces clashing. The battle would start with artillery fire around 2 p.m., but it wouldn't, since cannons weren't like as powerful. They were still like not super powerful. Like the use of cannons wouldn't become popular just yet. They were still powerful, but they didn't have much effect in this battle. And since it was also raining, the lack of advancement by either side and the conditions made Prince Rupert go, I don't think there's going to be a battle today. I think it's going to happen tomorrow morning. Let me head back to my camp, my tent, and start planning, get some rest. And as he and his forces were slowly like going back, like breaking formation, Lord Sir Thomas Fairfax would notice, like, hey, they are not in formation. We can catch them with their pants down. This is like an opportune time to attack these forces. So the parliamentarians would advance. And when they advance, a thunderstorm would happen. So now this land would now become a slog. It's rainy, could be cold, muddy conditions. It's making battle a slog. Like you just can't. Like, it's hard to like gain ground. But the parliamentarians would fight through the slog and gain upper hand due to their superior discipline and tactics, as like Oliver Cromwell would actually go for toe to toe with Prince Rupert's forces, and since his were more well trained, more well disciplined, they would defeat the royalist forces of Prince Rupert. And on the other side, Sir Thomas Fairfax would also lead his troops, cavalry, against the others and win. This would allow them to advance forward and circle around the royalist forces and pincer, leaving them trapped, leaving into a slog and horrible conditions for those infantrymen of the royalists. And now the after effects. This battle was a parliamentarian victory, and the royalists would suffer around 4,000 dead and 1,500 captured, as well as most of, I think some accounts say most, if not all, the guns they had at the battle were captured by the Roundheads. And the Roundheads slash parliamentarians would only have 300 dead, showcasing that for every one dead parliamentarian, there was 14 dead royalists, showcasing how their tactics, their discipline was so much superior than those of the royalists. And you see the picture on the left of Oliver Cromwell at the Battle of Marston Moor, showcases like how the conditions are bad, like the muddy, hard to gain traction, hard to gain land. And then there's also the on the picture on the right showcases the monument which commenced the Battle of Marston Moor. This and the story I was talking about earlier with the Earl of Manchester. After this battle, they would like retreat, and go take some rest. To which Oliver Cromwell called out or Edward Montagu, going like, "I don't think you really want this more war. I don't think your head's in it." In this like this, showcasing how Oliver Cromwell was literally calling out anyone on the bullshit. This war, though this was the largest fight in the First Against the War, and it was a large turning point, war would still continue on for a bit more because it still kind of stalemated until the Battle of Naseby, where Oliver Cromwell would defeat the king's forces, thus letting the uh, parliamentarians be the winners of the First English Civil War. And now this war was not long lived, as shortly after they won, the Second English Civil War would start, and that's a different topic for a different day. And I thank you for listening to my topic, and I hope you have a nice day in summer.